I won't rewind. So, all right. So anyway, I do that a lot in our studio as well. I forget to turn the mic on, then I have to record again. But unless it's live, and then we have trouble. The month of September has really caught a lot of people's attention because there's a lot of things that are happening. And of course, the Vatican is in the headlines in the month of September as well because of all the events that Pope Francis is actually doing there in the United States, not to mention other countries before he gets there. But I wanted to highlight a few of these here. Just so we can kind of look at this. And of course, some of these have already come and gone. I know Jonathan Kahn had predicted the collapse of the economy at the end of the Shemitah year. And I'm not saying that it's not going to collapse. I still think that it's going to go down, but I have a feeling that it's more planned than it is not, because there is a desire of the world leaders to bring about a new world order, which also must have a new world economic system. And starting with Pope Benedict, they made it quite clear they wanted to be the head of this economic system and this economic powerhouse. Recently on CT News in the Czech Republic, Vladimir Putin was on there with President Zeman, and I happen to like President Zeman quite a bit. He's a Jewish man. He's very devout Jewish believer. But they were on their program together there, and Zeman has been concerned about the economy, the way things are going, the sanctions against Russia, etc. I'm not pro-communism or anything like that, but I do think that Russia has been done wrong when it comes to the sanctions that have been levied against them, as I have followed the news on this, but that's another story altogether. But anyway, he says to Zeman, you don't have to worry about anything about the economy. And I'm just paraphrasing this. He says, because it will all change next year. So it makes you wonder if he doesn't have the inside scoop on what's going on and what's planned for the future. But anyway, we had on here, of course, we had the double eclipse that happened on Rosh Hashanah. And that was kind of interesting, as Brother Kellen had sent this to me. The article on it, NASA says this is something that has never happened in the history of the earth. There's a lot of speculations we could go on with that right about now, but I haven't had a chance to investigate all that, but it certainly could be a sign nonetheless. Israel's New Year, of course, we know began as well. September 15th, Jade Helm in the United States ends their particular thing there. On September the 17th, Congress will vote on the Iran deal, and unfortunately, Obama already has enough players to where it cannot be overridden. And keep in mind, when I say these things, I do believe that God has a divine plan regardless. So even though I want to be a voice against these things, many people write me and they'll say, Steve, you know, these are prophetic events that must come to pass. And I say, well, I agree with you, but still I want to stand on that day that I was on God's side regardless, and I still was a voice against the evils that come against Israel and all the other things that are happening in the world. Do I know the nations will come against Israel? Absolutely I do. But I'm going to be a voice that is against every nation that is against Israel nonetheless. I mean, I am born Jewish. Most people know me by Stephen Ben-Nun. That's the name I write under. That was my father's name. They changed it after the Inquisition. We were Ben-Nun to begin with, and I did actually change my name back to what it actually was. On September the 20th through the 26th here in Israel, something you guys may not be aware of, but the World Council of Church has scheduled a nice little protest against the Jewish people. And they tried to be a little bit politically correct, but they can't even get political correctness right in their entire article. They are flat out saying that the Jewish people are occupiers of the land of Palestine, which actually is a name that was created by the Romans to begin with. We're not an occupier. We just come back to take what's rightfully ours. And if you want to get into occupation, the real occupation happens to be Rome. Rome, thanks to Shimon Peres, which we'll get into a little bit here, has been handed over to the Jewish people. We don't have access to the Temple Mount without being really good and nice and being politically correct and obeying whatever the Vatican and the Palestinian Authority has to say. And then maybe we might get permission to go up on the Temple Mount. We have security forces there, but unfortunately the Jewish people are not given the liberty to go where what God has given us to start with. Moving on, though, on September the 21st, it's the UN's International Day of Peace. That's a joke. September 23rd is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. It is on the September the 23rd also, Pope Francis meets with President Barack Obama with their first meeting there. I do have a feeling, I can't say that it's so, but I do believe that we will see prophecy being fulfilled. However, most of the prophecies I will be speaking out today, in fact all of them except this one here, come from the Jewish Tanakh, which is something I study very passionately. I have for more than 30 years from the Hebraic language aspect of it. But when it comes to this right here, in the Christian Bible, as I call it, I don't mean to say that in offense, but it's just to separate so that my Jewish brethren understand what I'm speaking about when I say that. But when it comes to the Christian Bible, or as it's called, the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, I didn't have this on here, but there's a very interesting prophecy in there that talks about this beast that is given power to make war with the saints, which is the Christian people that don't go along with what Rome likes you to go along with. And this is why you see a major pull of churches coming back into the Catholic Church. A lot of evangelical leaders and different ones, Methodists, Presbyterians, all have come back and joined up with Rome. But if you don't join with Rome, you're going to be that target where they make war with the saints. According to Revelation, it's actually given him that power, as well as over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. Now, some people might say, well, that's going to be an Arab, it's going to be a Muslim. Well, you have to look at one of the apocryphal writings that was done by Yeshua, or Jesus, for those that may not know. In the book called The Humane Gospel of Yeshua there, it actually writes about the one that does all the blasphemy. And Jesus himself is quoted as saying, the guy that will blaspheme my name in heaven, and everyone that lives in heaven will take up my name and do it that way. So you don't really know who he is unless you look at some of these books that were never allowed to be a part of your canon. But anyway, that was a church and state religion issue, so we'll go into that a little bit later. But anyway, so we got this guy coming on the scene that's going to be given power over everything in the world, and that's pretty much in line with the New World Order. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen here in September, but the thing is they're trying to lay the groundwork. And on one Vatican website that I looked at, they said there's not a president over the United Nations, and then they said as of yet with an exclamation point. I think they're hinting around to something, if you ask me. Anyway, on the 24th, Pope Francis will address both houses of Congress, something, if I'm not mistaken, has never been done in the history of the world. And also, he will address the United Nations General Assembly on the 25th. And, of course, we know that the conclusion of the blood moons happens on the 28th of September as well. Very interesting things, to say the least, that is happening in the month of September, and that's only a few. I think there's like 30-something different things that I've seen people list on there. We can go on to the next slide there. So as we were to say, if all goes well, we will have a new world order. By the way, the picture that you're looking at, I took that picture there at Millennial Mall in Orlando, Florida. It's very strange. It's actually like a pool of water inside this tank, and somehow or another, as it goes up, it forms the eye, and it's in the middle of a zodiac. There's two of those there. It's kind of a unique thing. I just thought that was kind of odd. So, and I'm not much into all the different things on Illuminati, stuff like that. It's just when I see things that are kind of interesting, I like to bring it out. So anyway, let's go to the next frame here. This is a picture I took myself of Pope Francis. I've taken about 200 of him thus far. And that way they can't say I infringe on someone's rights and using someone else's photo. But I took this myself. It was kind of an unusual one there. I have a very powerful lens. But anyway, it says I put on here, the Vatican has a new strategy. And what I mean by that is something we're going to go into here in just a moment here, because we're going to cover three basic points here. We're going to examine the current crisis here in Israel. We're going to look at Israel's history that has been shaped by anti-Semitism, basically just rapidly going through the history of what's happened, and the current prophecies that are being fulfilled. And when I say current prophecies, you are having prophecies fulfilled in the Tanakh so rapidly, and most people have no idea that they're being fulfilled on a day, well, not on a daily basis, but have been fulfilled here very rapidly here in just recent days. Looking though, let's go real quick to current crisis here. This article here appeared on Israel National News, or Arutz Shiva, those that go by that. And Giulio Meotti, I've actually had Giulio on our Israeli News Live before. We've interviewed him before. He's written several books about the Vatican's desire to take over this land. Giulio, by the way, is an Italian journalist. He is not Jewish whatsoever. He is, as far as I know, he is a Christian. But he doesn't really profess too much either way as far as in a religious manner, one way or the other. But he has seen much like Joel Boehnerman, Barry Chamish. I know Barry as well. Chamesh is actually how you say his name, but he says it, I guess, for the English speakers. And we'll be talking about them a little bit later. But these three men here have exposed the plot that Rome is doing from a journalist, investigative journalist point of view that is really very alarming, because we realize we have an Arab problem, and I'm not getting away from the Arab problem. We have that all over the world, but what you need to see is who controls this Arab problem that's around the world, and we're going to go into that from a historical standpoint in a moment. Anyway, in this article here, this came out here just a few weeks ago under the op-eds. The Vatican wants the Temple Mount taken from the Jews. This was a little bit further down in the article, but it's something I thought was very important. It says the Vatican PLO agreements have been signed to enable the eviction of the Jews from Jerusalem. This follows a memorandum signed by the Palestinians and Vatican official in 2000, which repeated the Vatican call for an international mandate to preserve the proper identity and sacred character of Jerusalem. It means a return to the time when half of Israel's capital was under Islamic control. The old city was closed to the Jews, and the synagogues were desecrated, and the walls barbed wired, and snipers divided the city by force. Now, keep in mind what we have here, if you think about it. We're seeing history totally repeat itself, or the stage, I might put it, for history to repeat itself. If you go back to this time of the Second Temple, right before the destruction, we were dealing with Roman occupation at that time. And that's exactly what we have today. About 6-7 months ago, I was in a tour with the Temple Institute. And I got the strangest thing said to us while we were there, as near the end of the tour, and it happened to be said to the entire group, so it's not like I was the only one and my wife the only one to hear it. But in that particular tour group there, the guide actually says that Jerusalem is not under Israeli control. That floored me. My question is whose control is it under? Now, we're not talking about Mount Zion or the Tomb of David or the Temple Mount. He said Jerusalem is not under Israeli control. Now, if you look, and we're going to go into it in a moment here, Joel Boehnerman clearly states in one of the news articles that Shimon Peres had sent a wire that was leaked out, that they had given over, a wire that went to the Vatican, that they would give Jerusalem to Rome. They would be in control of it. It caused a huge uproar here in Israel. Of course, Shimon Peres, at that time, he was as the president here, he denied it. He said they blotted out the word not. I'm not going to hand it over. But you be the judge as we go through it. Next screen here. This is from the same article here. And it's at the beginning of the article that Giulio wrote, but I think it's important that you see this. In 2000, speaking in a mosque, because Giulio is going to kind of take you back a little bit. Now keep in mind as I'm saying this, all of you guys are aware already that the Vatican has declared the Palestinians as a state. And for those that may not know, we don't really have any such thing as Palestinians. Again, it was a Roman name that was given, and it's something that the Vatican has used to be able to get control of this entire region, or as much of it as they possibly can. Okay? So he goes on, in 2000, speaking in a mosque in Palestinian-held Ramallah, Yasser Arafat declared, "No one will succeed in removing us from our land, including Jerusalem, and the Palestinian flag will fly from the Temple Mount and from the churches in Jerusalem." Arafat could say that because he had won the Vatican's support for his terroristic strategy. On June 26, 2015, the Vatican signed its first treaty with the state, quote-unquote, state of Palestine. It is a logical conclusion of a long path. When the Pontiff John Paul II ascended the Temple Mount in 2000, Judaism's most holy site, he wasn't welcomed by Israeli officials, but by representatives of the Palestinian Authority. And the holy complex was bedecked in Arab flags. It was Pope's implicit recognition of Islamic hegemony. It was taken to mean that Islam and Christianity suppressed Judaism and have the right to inherit its holy places. That was on Israel National News, as I mentioned before, by Giulio Miotti. Now, there's so many things that can be said just in what is actually being said here. But one thing, let me just point out to you guys, and you're probably already aware of this, the United Nations has agreed to raise the flag of both the Palestinians and the Vatican there at the United Nations at this conference coming up. Now, the Vatican was pretty sly in this, because when the Palestinians requested it to be, they would be raised and raised together, the Vatican comes out with a statement saying that this cannot be done. They were kind of acting like they were against it. They weren't really against it. It was only just to save face. They're definitely for it. And also, by the way, if you look at a Catholic flag, which I don't have one here for you right now, I've taken many pictures of them, there's two keys on it. Those two keys represent temporal and spiritual power. That means political and spiritual power. The Vatican claims, and this is not just a claim, I did a tour at the Vatican as well with one of their own tour guides, and I was told, never asked the question, I was told as we came across the Vatican flag, you see these two keys on here. That represents temporal and spiritual powers. And they say, we do believe that the Catholic Church holds the political power of the world as well as all spiritual powers of the world, and there is no other higher authority. So you tell me who thinks they're in control. We'll say it that way there. I like the way Ezekiel puts it. The prophet Ezekiel in chapter 35, because that's another prophetic chapter, by the way. We probably just lightly touch on it. Ezekiel makes the comment, he said, you didn't know I was there. By the way, Ezekiel 35 is the dividing of the land as two nations, two states. By the way, the two-state solution has really nothing to do with the Palestinians. It's only a front. And we'll go into that in a moment as well. Let's go to the next screen. Israel's history is shaped by anti-Semitism. And by the way, the Giulio Miotti's article, we are going to come back to that in a moment, because I want to bring out the prophetic impact of what happened and which scripture that actually fulfilled. We're going to kind of rapidly go through the history of this here. When I was looking at the history of anti-Semitism against the Jewish people, I was alarmed at how much there is. And again, I want to state this so people know. I'm not against Catholic people. I love them very much. And I really appreciate those that have eyes to see. I had a Catholic church in South America write an article about me. And they were actually in support of me because they don't like the Pope they have. And that shocked me. Of course, I've seen a lot of Catholic people leave their church literally by the hundreds that have listened to our channel on YouTube. Anyway, let's look at some of the history here. In 325, of course, that's when we know that Constantine got together. He had a big problem, by the way, for those that do not know the historical side of this. He had a big problem with the Christians that were coming into Rome, because the Christian community was very much for equality. A lot of people are not aware of that. There were 200 different books that were written about Yeshua, Jesus. 200 different books. Like in the Christian Bible, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You have 4. By the way, there's not a single fragment for Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or John. Not to say that there's not a lot of accuracy there, but I look at this from a scholastic point of view. You have no fragments. That bothers me. Not to say that we have to have fragments, but we, as far as like in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have the complete Tanakh there, along with quite a few other books, and quite frankly, we had over 200 Psalms that we don't have in the current Bible today, another thing that bothers me. That may have a lot to do with what happened here in 325 at the Nicaea Council. By the way, the Nicaea Council was not just a bunch of good old Christian boys coming together to try to put together a Bible. Constantine was dealing with a political problem in his country. When I was with an historian there in Rome about a year ago, the historian explained to me exactly what was going on. He said equality was not the way of life in Rome. He said it was set up very much like the United States. He said, and by the way, all the Christians and stuff that were fed to the lions and things of that nature, he said it was no different than America when you electrocute the guy that breaks the law. He said we had a death penalty. This guy made no bones about it. We had a death penalty. There were people that were coming against the Roman Empire and the way of life, and we had a death penalty, and the Christians were put to death according to the law. He didn't make anything big out of it, or like it was some kind of mistreatment or anything of that nature there. He said, but what Constantine was dealing with was this equality. Our society, the Roman society, back nearly, 1,800 years ago now, the only way it could function was not to have equality. You had to have women being this, at home doing what she's supposed to do, quote unquote, the way people think it is. Judaism, not all Judaism believes that. Many in the Reformed Judaism do believe in equality as well. But also the part about slavery. Slavery was a must for them. It's still really a must if you think about it in America. All the people that are in poverty over there are slaves to some company so that the guy at the top gets very wealthy. So the thing was there was a big issue with this new Christianity, and what he had to do was Constantine had to put a stop to the way it was going, and they had to create a state religion. So he brought some of the church fathers that were willing to work with him together, along with some of the Mithras priests that he had, and they compiled together the first canon of what is called the Bible today. Like in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Enoch was included as part of the canon, although it was sold off to someone over in Kuwait, and we only got a microfiche copy of that, but nonetheless it was considered the part of the Bible of the Zadokite priests that were there at that time. But anyway, moving right along though, let's look at the anti-Semitism that was really against the Jews. According to, right at this time too, at the Nicaea Council, we had the conversation and fellowship with Jews is forbidden to the clergy by the Council of Nicaea. In the 4th century, Christian emperors of Rome decreed that Christians converting to Judaism and Jews obstructing the conversions of other Jews to Christianity will incur the death penalty. So much for Christianity being so nice and plausible. I'm not against it. Believe me, I am a believer as far as that Yeshua is Messiah. But I'm not the run-of-the-mill type believer. Okay, so I make sure I make that clear too. In 413, a group of monks swept through Palestine, destroying the synagogues and massacring the Jews at the Western Wall. In 937, and by the way, there wasn't a big gap either when I looked at the history. I just wanted to pick some of the main things. There was so much history, it was not even funny. But Pope Leo VII encourages his newly appointed Archbishop of Menez to expel all Jews who refuse to be baptized. That doesn't sound like anything that Yeshua would do, does it? Everything was supposed to be free in the way he believed, if you want to believe, believe. If you don't, you don't. But if you have a state religion, you do it or you're dead, In 1081, Pope Gregory VII writes to King Alfonso of Spain, telling him that if he allows Jews to be lords over Christians, he is oppressing the church and exalting the synagogue of Satan. We know that's not true. 1182, Jews are expelled from France. All their property is confiscated, and Christians' debts to them are canceled with the payment of 1/5 of their value to the treasury. I've always wondered which treasury that went to, but I haven't had a chance to research that. 1347 to 1350, during the Black Death, Jews are accused of poisoning wells in order to overthrow Christendom, and many thousands of Jews are killed. You guys heard that a little bit earlier today. 1350, Jews are expelled from many parts of Germany. And by the way, the ones that you see listed here are just a very small sample of how many there really were. But in 67, it was from Hungary. In 1421, Austria. 1432, Saxony. And then in 1456, Pope, I can't say his name, Callistus or something like that, the third. Thank you, brother. Bans all social communications between Christians and Jews. How nice. 1475, the entire Jewish community in Trent, northern Italy, is put to death on the allegation that it had murdered a boy for religious purposes. That happened more than once in history. Jews are expelled in 1485 from Warsaw and Krakow, and of course during that time it was just rampant everywhere. it would have been very difficult to be Jewish at that time. I mean, my mother's family were all in Eastern Europe, Germany, and thousands of them were killed in the Holocaust. My father's family, the same. But I cannot imagine what it's like to be kicked out of a country, go to the next country, and the next country is kicking you out as well. It is a very difficult life. 1492, after forcing many Jews to be baptized and then referring to them as Marranos, which is swine, after an inquisition in which some 700 Marranos were burnt at the stake for showing signs of Jewish taint, Spain expels all Jews from the country. In 1555 to 1559, Pope Paul IV restricts Jews to ghettos and decrees that they are to wear distinctive headgear. In 1566 to 1572, Pope St. Pius V expels Jews from the Papal States, allowing some to remain in Rome's ghettos and in Canaan for commercial reasons. And by the way, there were, in the history that I've studied, there are a couple of popes that seem to have compassion for the Jewish people down through this 1800-year period, but it was extremely rare. And if it's anything like Pope Pius XII, who was working with Hitler, where they've tried to cover it up here in modern days to say it was nothing but propaganda against him, I don't know the answer for sure. But I have seen some things that were written about some popes that actually tried to help the Jewish people during their times. In 1592 to 1605, Pope Clement VIII includes a ban on all Jewish books in the expanded index of forbidden books. There again, just like it was at the Council of Nicaea. And by the way, Constantine did order the burning of all these books. They searched throughout all the lands to burn them everywhere they possibly could. And a lot of the early believers in Yeshua, by the way, too, were vegetarians, as is written by a lot of the early church fathers. So Constantine, because he didn't like that, poured molten lead down their throats if they did not eat meat in order to kill them, punish them, or whatever the case may be. Nobody I could think could survive that, though. In 1826, Pope Leo VII decrees that Jews are to be confined to ghettos and their property is to be confiscated. Now keep this in mind when we're looking at these right here. The whole point that I want you to see is the consistency of Rome and their replacement theology, which, by the way, is, they claim that Peter is their first pope, and yet at the same time, for my Jewish brothers and sisters that happen to be here, or whether you're watching around the world, this is nothing the way that Yeshua himself taught. Nothing like it. Nothing like the early apostles. They were nothing like this. And the sad thing is you have it written in the book called the New Testament, and there are a lot of Jews that pick it up. Tovia Singer, I know Tovia. He's a rabbi here. He debates many Christian scholars, and he's very successful in defeating them because many of them don't know the Tanakh very well. Many people have tried to get me and him to debate, and Tovia wrote me because the people that have tried didn't know we knew each other, and he says, Steve, there's no way I'll debate you. He said, I agree with too much of what you say. And he asked me, he says, I want to talk to you personally why you believe the way you do, though. He says, because there's no one like you that I've ever seen that claims to believe that Yeshua to be the Messiah, but yet talks the way you do. In 1904, in an interview with the Zionist leader, Theodor Herzl, Pope St. Pius X says, I know it is disagreeable to see the Turks in possession of our holy places. We simply have to put up with it. But to sanction the Jews which wish to occupy these sites that we cannot do, the Jews have not recognized our Lord. Therefore, we cannot recognize the Jewish people. If you go to Palestine and your people settle there, you will find us clergy and churches ready to baptize you all. Now, one of the speakers, it's hard for me to hear up there in the booth up there while we're recording there because I've got the sound of the lag time and stuff, but one of the speakers mentioned that, and it may have been Sister Alial. Forgive me, sis, with the name, it's that dyslexia. mentioned about, and it is epidemic. It is probably the most epidemic thing. What I'm about to tell you is the most epidemic in Christianity for anti-Semitism of all things that could be said, is that Jews go to hell if they do not profess that Yeshua is the Messiah. Have you failed to recognize the words of David, the psalmist? He says in this 51st Psalm that God desires a sincere and contrite, a broken spirit, a sincere heart. He even says he does not want the blood of bulls and goats. He said, in fact, David says, if he had wanted this, I would have given it to him. God wants a sincere, repentant heart. And I don't know. I've seen a lot of my Christian brothers and sisters in the world, and I've seen a lot of Jewish brothers and sisters. In 2004, when I lived here in Israel on a regular basis, I was in the suicide bombing on September 22nd, where a young Palestinian woman was dropped off with me on the sidewalk, and we commenced to walk down the sidewalk together. And then the Lord placed in my heart suddenly, go the other way. And I turned around, and I didn't want to go the other way. I was going to a little place where I prayed at, often in the woods there, along with many other Orthodox rabbinical brethren that would pray there. But I obeyed what I heard, and I turned around. And as I did, I ended up going right with her again, but this time the wall was there, and I began to go down the mountain a little bit, and then she blew herself up. She killed 2 of the security officers that stopped her and wounded a dozen more. But you know, God said something else to me that day as well. When He told me to turn around, and at first I didn't obey Him, He says, if you don't turn around, when you get to the corner, and that was right where she blew herself up at, He says, you will not leave that spot. You have another phone call to make to America. And when you do, you will turn your back to the wind so you can hear. And it was true. That's exactly what I did. So He tells me, go the other way. And sure enough, the pole there, naturally, with her blowing herself up there at the corner, was totally shredded up with the shrapnel. The next day, I'm again praying down there in the woods. And there's an Orthodox brother walking back and forth, and he's got his hands up to God, and he's saying, Kol Hazman Adonai. Because we also had a bus blown up as well at that time. And he was crying out to God, how much longer, Lord? Because he's looking for redemption. They pray like you pray, not just from books. We don't always just, as Jews, don't just pray from books, but from our heart. Like the brother that spoke a little while ago, and he says that when the brother had wronged someone that had passed away, and they take 10 witnesses and they go to the grave, God hears that. In 1921, speaking of Pope Benedict V, the Vatican spokesman informed representatives of the Zionist movement that they did not wish to assist the Jewish race, which is permeated with a revolutionary and rebellious spirit, he says, to gain control over the Holy Land. They were doing everything they could to keep the Jews from going back. At the conference in 1925 of Catholic academicians in Innsbruck, Austria, Bishop Sigismund Waits calls the Jews an alien people who had corrupted England, France, Italy, and especially America. I don't go into the rest of the history because it would be too long to draw it out, but we know as far as the Holocaust, the things that happened, there were many Catholic priests, many Christians that risked their lives and lost their lives in rescuing our people. But there was also a lot of blinded eyes and a lot of head turns from the massacre that was going on against the Jewish people. Like the slaughterhouses that are all over the world, we don't hear the cry of the animal. And what the people chose to do is they didn't want to hear the cries of the Jews as they were led to their massacre. And Pope Pius the 12th had signed an accord and agreement with Adolf Hitler. And he wasn't going to get in Hitler's way. And they permitted a lot of what happened. But it was also, there was a good thing that come out of the Holocaust, if it could be said that there was a good thing. It forced our people home. And even though the British had a mandate that was to allow the Jewish people to come home, which has never been honored, by the way, the land we're supposed to occupy, not occupy, but we're supposed to receive, covers all of Israel, including the West Bank, Gaza, parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria, and even Jordan. Jordan was not even a country at the time. This is part of the land. We were actually being given back by, before it was called the United Nations, this land was being given to us the way it should have been. But then everything began to change. The restrictions on how many Jews could come in here, and you're going to find out why. In this case here, the Vatican changes its course of action, as I said, but not until after the Holocaust. And that course of action, they got very sly about the way they did it. When they saw that the Jewish people were going to go in there, the Vatican really began to work on a plan. They worked on a plan to be able to totally overthrow or to control who came in here. This is why the British mandate limited how many Jews could come in here at the time. In our next slide here, Shimon Peres, there's a picture of Shimon Peres and Pope John Paul II. I want your attention to come to the comment here made by Barry Chama. She was the Israeli investigative journalist. He says here in 1979, Yitzhak Rabin published his autobiography. Within was a one-line offbeat quote. He said that unlike all Jewish children growing up in Poland, Shimon Peres spent his early education at a Jesuit school. Barry writes, "It was an odd fact, and I took a mental note of it without understanding its significance." I'm not going to just say things just to say them, but what's interesting, if you think about it, is as the Jewish people were trying to get back in, and many boatloads were turned away to their deaths as well, of those that were trying to come to the homeland, because we weren't accepted anywhere else. But as they were trying to come in, there was a struggle for power before the 1948 war. It's a struggle that's been written by very, very faintly by very few people at all. Earlier you saw at the very beginning the man Tuvia Bielski, and those of you that have seen the movie Defiance, you know who I'm actually speaking of there. I know the Bielski family personally. And I won't say who it was, but I had a private meeting one time, and I could do it because I was a family friend. I could just go by and visit. But I had a meeting with one of the family members there in the Bielski family, and we were sitting down talking about his father and the things that had happened from the time that he was rescuing the Jewish people in Belarus as it was called at that time. And by the way, the reason the movie is so spliced together, they were using an interview I did with Chuck Missler to put that trailer together. But we were sitting there talking together about the things that were happening. And he says, after the war, my father took his family and went back to Israel. But he said a strange thing happened to my father while he was there. there were certain factions that were trying to get power right before they were going to have the war in 1948. Tuvia was asked to actually be part of the battle, the Battle of Independence. And this was before it was going to happen. They knew they were going to fight. But they were actually going to try to take Jerusalem. As you can see by the equipment coming up the highway here. They were going to try to take Jerusalem. But the thing was, he told me, there were certain families that were fighting for power and control of this land. Tuvia was asked, when they put him over a particular regiment of men that were going to fight in this, he was to guard one place coming up to Jerusalem. And they asked him, or told him, that he was not to allow anyone, whether they be Jewish or not, to pass this point. And so he asked, am I to kill them? He says, yes. Because it was another faction that was trying to gain control of the land. I can't speculate as to say why, but I heard it with my own ears. Tuvia, being the noble man that he was, he refused. He said, I will never take the life of another Jewish brethren. He said, I spent the last 6 years of my life in a wilderness. I rescued over 1,000 Jewish people, men and women, old and young. He says, and you think I would take the life of one of my own people? He said, there's no way. And he refused to be a part of it. He lived in Israel for a few years and then ended up going to the United States, migrating to the U.S. And then from there, the rest was history as far as that. But the point is we see that there was a reason that people were trying to get political control, whereas the Jewish people just wanted to come home. You know, there's always a bit of evil. If Satan can get a bit of evil in there, he's going to try to pervert something. But this is what I believe that Barry Chamish was looking at when he made the comment about Shimon Peres. And I don't know Shimon Peres personally, and I don't say that he's a bad guy by no means. But the one thing that concerns me has been the deal that was put together with Shimon Peres in the Vatican in 1993. Let's move on. In March of 1994, the newspaper Chadashot revealed a most remarkable secret in the Middle East. It was the peace process. A friend of Shimon Peres, the French intellectual Marek Hatler, claimed in an interview that in May 1993 he delivered a letter from Peres to the Pope. Within, Peres promised to internationalize Jerusalem, granting the UN political control of the old city of Jerusalem and the Vatican hegemony of the holy sites within. The UN would give the PLO a capital within its new territory, and East Jerusalem would become a kind of free trade zone of the world, of world diplomacy, wrote Barry in that article there. Moving on to the next screen there. This is still from the article that Barry Chamish actually wrote here. Hatler's claim was backed up in the Italian newspaper La Stampa, which added that Arafat was apprised of the agreement and it was included in the secret clauses of the Declaration of the Principles signed in Washington in September 1993. They were making, behind the scenes, the Oslo Accords was only the cover-up, but they were actually plotting and planning to divide the land, and by the way, the entire time, what's happening? You have a prophecy from the book of Daniel, chapter 11, I think it's verse 23, that's being fulfilled here, where it speaks about that prince that shall come. The prince that shall come is in chapter 9. I forget what verse it's in, but that prince that shall come is of the people that destroyed the temple and the sanctuary. The ones that destroyed the temple and the sanctuary was Titus, the Roman general. And of course, a lot of people say, well, he wasn't by himself. It was the Syrians. Titus really didn't do the bad work. Well, then why does Titus have that nice, wonderful memorial there in Rome of his conquest of the temple, taking the temple treasures back to Rome? Okay, so there's a major issue there. All right, so we see, though, that according to Daniel in chapter 11, that they come up strong, that this prince comes up strong with a small people. Now, if Daniel is correct in his prophecy, which I happen to believe he is, that the princes that shall come is of the people that destroyed the temple and the sanctuary, and Titus happened to be a Roman. I don't think he was Syrian or anything else, but he was a Roman in fact. Therefore, it tells us the prince that's going to come is going to be a Roman. And from that part of the world, right where the Vatican sits today. And we find out later in the prophecy in Daniel chapter 11, verse 23 there, that he comes up strong with a small people. That small people are the Palestinians. See, the Palestinian people, there's many of them that would like to live here in peace along with the Israeli people, and that's something that the Torah commands us. If they want to live by our laws and live in peace, we are to receive them as a brother. But there's also a lot of radicals, I know that as well. And that's where the problem comes in. But they're being instigated by this political machine that Rome is doing to take over this land. For the sake of time, because I know there's no way I can actually finish it, go and look at Joel Bannerman when you get a chance. Joel Bannerman is really the one that exposed this whole Vatican plot that is going on today. And if you read his articles that he wrote, he is an Israeli journalist. It is just amazing what he actually brought out there. I want to just speak to you because there's no way I can, for time's sake, I'm just going to go without going with the screen here. Brother Kellen, if you would, when we get to the place where we do, if you want to bring up a picture there, that'll be fine. Let me real quick show you, though, the historical side of this, because you may not realize what I'm going at. Our biggest enemy as far as the Jewish people is Esau. God said in His Word in the book of Malachi that He hated Esau, but He loved Jacob. Okay, even in the Christian Bible, you have the same statement put there. I forget exactly where it's at, but it also says in the Christian Bible as well that God loved Jacob and He hated Esau. But the thing is, if you ever look at the story of Esau and Jacob, when Jacob returns back, it's strange. Even though Esau is supposed to hate his brother and kill him, he really never does anything to his brother. We don't really see anything there. But yet there's so many things that are written about Esau and against his brother Jacob, it's not even funny. All right, so the question is, though, because a lot of people think, well, David and Saul both killed off all the descendants of Esau. We read in 1 Kings, David is the one that picks up the war, and the Bible actually reads that he killed every single male there was, except one. And that one child that was not killed was called Hadad. Hadad, the Bible says, in the 1 Kings, I believe the 11th chapter, says that he was of the royal seed of the house of Esau. He survived. He actually goes down into Egypt along with some of the Edomite servants. And he's received there by the Pharaoh of Egypt. He's given a house there and even given the daughter of his wife, it's either the daughter of his wife or his wife's sister to marry. Just like Esau, he follows in the line of his father and he intermingles amongst the people that Esau's mother did not want him to do. Rebekah didn't want this to happen. But you remember the story of Rebekah, how she has there's a battle in her womb? And she goes before God and she says, "Why am I thus?" Do you realize it is prophecy? Do you know the prophecy of the battle that was going on in her womb really had nothing to do with back in that age there, some 4,000 years ago, but it was a prophecy that actually had its fulfillment in the day you're living in now? Do you realize when they first came up and John Kerry talked about he was going to do a 9-month negotiations here for peace, the Lord revealed to me on that day that He said that. He said it's the prophecy of Rebekah. Because there were what? 2 nations in her womb. And when they come forth, they will be separated. At first, I thought the Lord meant that He was talking about Israel and the Palestinians, and it's going to be a 2-state solution there. And then the Lord revealed to me further, and He said, no, it's Rome. That's your true Esau. Hadad, by the way, leaves Egypt and becomes the king of Syria, Aram. Now you'll see why there's a connection between Esau and all the Arab world. Is that he's always married in amongst the Arab people. Okay? And then what do we have? Then it moves fast forward. After he does that, then we go into the book of Obadiah. The book of Obadiah clearly defines everything that is happening in the history of Esau. And I want to share some of the highlights of that with you. If you look at verse 6, it says, how is Esau searched out? How are his hidden places sought out? If you drop down to verse 10, it says, for the violence done to thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou didst stand aloof, in the day that strangers carried away his substance, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast one of them. So when the scholars tell you that it wasn't Titus that really destroyed the temple, it was actually the Syrians, well, Obadiah would agree with you. Obadiah clears that mess up for you right there with all the scholars that don't never pay attention to the prophecies that are right there before your eyes. So yes, Obadiah shows that Esau was as one with them. So yes, Titus gave the orders and sat on the sidelines while the Syrians maybe did the dirty work. But don't forget, Hadad was the king of Syria at one time. And even according to the Jewish sages, they record that the descendants of Esau went from there to northern Africa, from northern Africa to Rome, and Obadiah picks it up from there. All right? So, verse 12, but thou shouldest not have gazed on the day of thy brother in the day of his disaster, neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. That clearly identifies 70 A.D. The children of Judah, the house of Judah, the house of Israel has already been dispersed throughout the entire world. So we have the house of Judah. And what do we have? Titus, the Roman general, the Edomite that is here. He's going to cover a lot more history, though. Let's go on now. Verse 13, thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have gazed. What verse was I in there? 13, I think. Okay. Entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have gazed on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that escaped. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. And anyone that knows the history of Titus the Roman general and what happened, that's exactly what they did. That's what happened at Masada down there. He cut off every single way. He didn't want a single Jew to escape. Why? Because it was the hatred of Esau. It wasn't Esau that was way back with Jacob when they grew up as boys. Esau did hate his brother for what he did to him. You know, Jacob did deceive his brother. There's no doubt about it. But when he come back, it seemed that they seemed to reconcile the difference there. But see, God knew what was going to happen in the future with Esau and his descendants and what they were planning on doing. And it's not over yet. Esau is gaining control over our land today. But in Isaiah 61, it's going to be finished. God is going to put an end to Esau and many other places. But let's read on. There's another very important prophecy I don't want you to miss here. Okay, in verse 15, for the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations, as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy dealing shall return upon thine own head. So everything that Esau has done is going to come back on him. And again, Esau, as I've showed you, Hadad, we did it a little fast, but Hadad's descendants, they've come down, which is Esau's children. They're in Rome. Rome now is the Catholic Church of Vatican of the world. And it doesn't mean that all Romans are bad or nothing like that, or Italians. I don't mean it like that either. The point is, it's the spirit of Esau. But there is a real physical children, like we are real physical Jews. Those of us that are Jews here, we are born Jews. I don't look like one. I'm the only white sheep in the family. I'm not the black sheep. I'm the white sheep. Everybody else in my family is dark and all that kind of stuff. But Jews are, because of moving all over the world, has changed our difference in looks and stuff. Verse 16 is the critical one here. Verse 16 is very important for you to realize here, because what you're about to hear is something that happened here in Israel and was fulfilled just recently. And it is one of the most powerful prophecies that you will ever hear, especially when I explain it to you from the Hebrew language and not from the English. First, I'll read it in English, though. It says here, Obadiah the prophet says here, for as you have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. Yea, they shall drink and swallow down, and shall be as though they had not been. And Savior, well, I'm sorry, I was meant to go to verse 17, but I didn't put that verse up there. But anyway, he does go in and he talks about deliverance being on Mount Zion. In Obadiah, he's also speaking that what happens here is on Mount Zion. I wish I had my Bible, but I don't, so I could read that to you. But here's what's interesting. In Hebrew, it says, Ki ka'ashashatetem. That happens to be, that's the very first sentence there, for as you have drunk upon my holy mountain. It's in the Hebrew plural, but it's also in the masculine. That first little part of that sentence means that whoever drank the first time, it was men only. There were no women, and it was just one group of them. According to the Vatican's own news reporter, people they had there that videoed it, and I watched the video, I listened to the broadcast on it. I couldn't find it so you could listen to it. They stated in their broadcast that when Pope Francis came on Mount Zion in the upper room above King David's tomb, which is, and I have to be honest, I wouldn't have had a problem, even though I don't agree with what he believes. I wouldn't have had a problem of him doing it in the upper room, but it was the following week, I believe, or the next week, they came and threw all the Jews out of the King David's tomb, and they held a mass in King David's tomb as well. But anyway, the first time, they reported that it was only Pope Francis, his delegation, and the priests that were present here in Jerusalem that partook in the Mass. It was men only. Okay? The prophecy says, Ki ka'asha shutetem. Only men would drink. The sentence continues on. Al ha-kodeshi, upon my holy mountain. And it does mention Mount Zion if you read the rest of the chapter. Upon my holy mountain. Ishatu kol hagoim. See? So shall all the nations, or the goim, the Gentiles, will continually drink. It is in the plural, gender inclusive. And as far as I know, I don't know if the practice has stopped. If anyone knows that, I would like to know. But as far as I know, they continue to do their communion services there. But the following Mass was both men and women from people from around the world. Prophecy is being fulfilled in Jerusalem, and I could go on and on and on with many more. I'll quickly try to give you a couple of more, though, real quick. The Israeli government gave the Pope an official seat when Pope Benedict was the pontiff at the tomb of David. I've seen so many people say, as far as in the Christian belief, that there's an Antichrist coming. I agree with that. But they always want to say, he's a Jew. No, he's not. But when you give the Pope of Rome a seat at the tomb of David officially, you have made him a Jew. You're claiming that he's the king of Israel. I'm going to close with one scripture I want to share with you. I don't know how many of you are aware, and I don't know Mike Evans personally, but Mike Evans anointed Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think when he was about 19, 20 years old, something like that. It was right after the death of his brother Jonathan. He came to Israel, I believe it was just by providence of God, but he ended up meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was a young man. He was not in politics. He anointed him. He rushed over to the mantle. He didn't even know what he was doing, grabbed a bottle of oil, poured it over Prime Minister Netanyahu's head, and anointed him and prophesied, you will be prime minister over Israel not once but twice. Other than the extra elections, it has only been 2 times, not counting the official part of the election. It's still only been 2 times. But here's what's interesting. In Micah chapter 4, God reminds us of something. One, it also deals with the internationalizing of Jerusalem. And let's see, can you go to that, Frank, brother? The one, I don't know if I have it on there or not. Let me just see if I do or not. I want to get to Micah. Oh, we had to skip so much. By the way, Psalm 83. A lot of people say, well, that's a war. That's Rome. That's Esau. The tents of Esau, by the way, are the churches that have joined back up with Esau. But if you'll notice, he's aligned with every Arabic nation practically there is to come against the Jewish people. That's your Psalm 83. It says they're confederate with one another. See, he's confederate with the churches. They've joined back together. The churches have joined with the Catholic people, the Edomites, the Esau people there, and they joined with the Arab people. It's exactly what Pope Francis has done. He's established a great alliance with the Arab world to come against Israel. Okay, but okay, here it is on frame number 36, brother. In Micah chapter 4, and this is where we'll close at. He says in verse 9, now why dost thou cry out aloud? The prophet Micah says, now by the way, earlier in the chapter he talks about that he's going to return us to Mount Zion. And he says we'll be here forever. And then he talks about us being in labor and pain to be delivered. O daughter of Zion. The daughter of Zion represented the future generation, which is us here today. All right? But then the prophet asks a very strange question. He says, is there no king in thee? You know why he asked that? Because we as Jews wanted a king when God had his prophet Samuel. We wanted a king. God says to Samuel, they didn't reject you, they rejected me in leading them. We got a king and we got some good ones, but we also ended up with an Ahab. Ahab married Jezebel. In modern days, Shimon Peres, like Ahab, married Jezebel and brought her into Israel. God will still forgive him because I believe he doesn't realize what he's doing. And you pray for him because he needs it. But as far as Benjamin Netanyahu, this is why Mike Evans anointed him. Mike doesn't know this, but the reason he anointed him was because Scripture had to be fulfilled. Micah knew that God was going to ask us as a Jewish people, is there no king in thee? In other words, all this trouble is around us and we can do nothing about it. We need Eliyahu to come. And by the way, in Exodus chapter 15, Yazashir Moshe, Ashira Ladonai Ga'o Ga'a Ve'rekevo. It's where he sings that God is going to take the horse and his rider and hurl him into the sea. It's only one horse and one rider Moses speaks about, and he speaks about it in the future. Rashi said Moses will return in the Messianic times. I believe Eliyahu, Elijah, and Moshe, the prophet, are going to return. In Exodus, I believe it's chapter 32 or 34, where he says he would do wonders like never before. Those wonders are about to happen. Many of the rabbis changed it to just marvels because they said, well, Moses couldn't do anything greater. He did the greatest he could do. But he said, no, there's going to be wonders like never before. And he said they'll be terrible. God is sending us as Jewish people, his deliverers. And by the way, in Obadiah, he says deliverers, plural, not singular. God bless you.